Hello, this is Jack from Historical Archery, and today we have this interesting antique, a Montagnard Crossbow from Vietnam. One of the things is when I received it, it was in pretty bad condition. In fact, the stock already cracked. It broke, the stock. So I had to glue the stock back on. So this is not a functional crossbow anymore because the stock here broke. By the way, the total length of this from this dimension and this dimension is above 500 millimeters. And this specific one is designed for two-hand use. And the reason is, well, first of all, this is not even functional. And second of all, this is designed for two-hand use because there is no pistol grip. So when you hold it one-handed, your thumb is blocking your sights. So you can shoot it one hand, but you cannot aim and fire with one hand. They use two hands because now you can actually offset your thumb, so now you have sights because you're using the bolt itself to aim the crossbow. Because you have the rear sights, which is the bolt nock, and the bolt head, well, this is not a straight bolt, but imagine the bolt is straight, you can then aim at it. But with that giant thumb of yours blocking the sights, it's not designed to be aimed and fired one-handed. Let's talk about the history of Montagnard crossbows. In the southeast of Asia, in Vietnam, you got other kinds of crossbows as well, such as the Hmong crossbow, which I made a video about. But Vietnam has quite a lot of different ethnicities, and the Montagnards are a hill tribe in Vietnam, and they are known as rugged people in the hill tribes that to the Vietnam Yue people, they consider them as more barbaric or uncivilized in their perspective. But they are well, experienced in using their natural materials of their homelands to continue to survive. Even today, some of them still live there, similar to their old ways of life that's been going on for perhaps thousands of years. Because this one's brought back by the Vietnam War, we got to talk about these in the context of the Vietnam War. So some people are saying the Americans are fighting Montagnard people with these crossbows in the jungles of Vietnam. In my opinion, these are probably grossly exaggerated. The Montagnard people had modern firearms as well. And so if they had a choice, if they had the ammunition, they most likely would have used modern firearms for warfare in the 1960s. So, of course, when the Americans visited the Montagnard people, they must have seen local people using these for hunting and also the trade with maybe cigarettes or whatever the Americans had, weapons or trading cards or something interesting that they've never seen in their lives. So, of course, one thing they can trade with is a crossbow. So I don't think these are really for military use. Of course, the Americans did experiment with these, and with the poison of the time, you can kill someone silently with these. However, they're quite unreliable because if you don't deliver the poison effectively enough, there's a decent chance the person will scream or yell or make sound when it gets shot. And it takes a few seconds or a few minutes for them to actually die from the poison. So it's quite unreliable to be used in that context. They had better options at the time, such as the older well-rod pistols and other weapons, such as just a simple knife. A combat knife from a trained person would probably be more effective than this at killing someone without making a lot of noise. Of course, you can also use a very large crossbow, but the problem is the larger crossbows make a lot of noise. If you ever see me shoot a big crossbow, it makes a lot of noise, and so it's going to alert people. Not as much as a firearm, but you're going to make sound for sure. There are depictions of one-handed crossbows by the Montagnard when they climb trees to shoot, but I think those are designed specifically with a more bent handle so you can shoot one-handed. But this one is a two-handed design because the thumb is blocking your sights. So if you hold with your left hand and then your right hand offsets, now you can pull the trigger. This is not your typical push pin trigger where it pushes up. No, this tilts this way. So I call this a T trigger. Not sure what people call this, what the historians call this, but it's a T, and you just tilt the trigger So with a heavy draw weight, you need quite a long lever to tilt it. And by tilting it, it would give it a 45-degree angle, which will allow the string to slide up and then shoot. It's difficult to say what are the advantages of this trigger compared to the pushpin trigger. They're different in their designs. The pushpin trigger needs a very long lever for heavy draw weights, but this one also needs a long lever to push. I think the pushpin trigger is better for very heavy draw weights, like 200 pounds, and then you see them like the Scandinavian crossbows with a huge lever to push that 200 pounds. But this trigger, you can't really do 200 pounds with it, but you don't need 200 pounds on these designs because, again, your job is to deliver poison. That's the real weapon, the poison, not the momentum of the bolt. So you don't need that much draw weight. These typically only had about 40 pounds to 60 pounds of draw weight. So, you know, a tilt like this, you can just, it's sufficient for the job. And then, of course, they would have decorations if they wanted to on the ends. So it's an interesting design, native to the Montagnards. I haven't seen them in other trigger designs. I've also seen Montagnard people with the kid crossbows that they just flick it instead of having a trigger at all, is just by flicking with the string because they're kid crossbows and the draw weights of those bows are very light. So I've also seen ones more inspired by modern firearms like pistols where it's a flicking device that's similar to some of the toys you see today. So there's all kinds of other triggers, but they're more probably influenced by firearms, but this is their traditional trigger. So let me demonstrate how this string works by pretending the string as the bowstring. So when you push the lever up, it flicks the string up because this tilting device, this T tilts up, you see that? Which makes the string have an angle to slide upwards, or else there is no angle for the string to slide. And that's simply how it works. And with a heavy draw weight, you really can't push with one finger. So you need both hands. You need a left hand to hold the bow while your right hand puts all your force with all the fingers. And that's why you see a lot of them, especially on the hunting crossbows, have a very long lever. So you can have more fingers squeezing that trigger. On a toy crossbow of only 20 or 30 pounds, it wouldn't really matter. I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something educational. Anyways, thanks for watching. This is Jack from Historical Archery.